Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast, folks. These are high-minded conversations for the post-prohibition era. I'm your host, Joe Dolce. I'm joined by our co-host and co-producer, Matthew Hendershot. Matthew, hello.
Hello, Joe. Happy to be back on the show. Excited for this one. It's gonna be an interesting ride.
This is a big one. This is a double episode we're producing, one of our first. We're talking about two very interesting topics. One is on the dangers of CBD. There's a lot of memes and things going on around all the potential possible harms of CBD. The second is a new format we're going to try. It's called Ask the Doctor, in which a real patient with a real problem gets on the line with a real doctor and talks it through. So stay tuned. It's very, very compelling material. I think you'll all really like it. This episode is brought to you by Summit 420, which is the cannabis conference of the Young President Association. We're happy to announce that the opening keynote this year is going to be by Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, the father of cannabis research. Dr. Mechoulam is best known for his discovery of THC and CBD. In 1964, he jump-started the medical revolution, which has transformed the debate around cannabis and the lives of so many people. Even more, in the 1980s, his team discovered that our brains, human brains, produce their very own cannabinoids. His career has spanned 60 years, and that is why he is known as the father of cannabis research. So in this keynote, Professor Mechoulam is going to reveal some of the science and the chemistry behind his latest innovation, which is a new family of synthetic and stable cannabinoid acid molecules, which has a higher potency than existing cannabinoids. This could offer some very promising therapeutic effects. In addition, this year's summit is going to feature Ethan Nadelman, the man who was responsible for jump-starting the medical cannabis revolution in California, Mark Williams, the inventor of one of the world's most excellent convection vaporizers, and Dr. June Chin, who's going to be talking about her decades of data gathered from patients and how you can mix nutraceuticals, exercise, and other supplements to get more from your cannabinoid medicines. So, YPO members, you can register for this amazing event at www.ypo.org/Summit420 The space is closing quickly. It's limited. And if you do register, you're free to bring along your spouse, your partner, and any associates. We look forward to seeing you there, April 23rd to 26th in San Francisco. Last episode got a lot of listener feedback, and I want to discuss it. Some of the feedback criticized me for putting a really tabloid headline on the idea of synthesizing cannabinoids. I wrote a headline called the Monsanto is it? What did I write? What's it called, Matthew?
Monsanto marijuana, I believe, was the original.
I wrote which was unfair and unjust. And when it was brought to my attention, I felt the shame, and we changed the headline to a more sober headline, because we're really not interested in being tabloid journalists here. We really are interested in investigating new and interesting topics and bringing these conversations to the fore. Mm-hmm. So, my bad. Responsibility taken. However, we got some other feedback from a lot of listeners. And Matthew, let's talk about what some of those folks had to say.
Sure. I think a good place to start is with the headline itself, because it was very misleading, right? Monsanto marijuana is not actually what Ben was talking about at all, because none of his science and none of his technology was actually dealing with marijuana. They are talking about naturally synthesized cannabinoids, chemicals that are being produced by other things that are, in fact, genetically modified. I think an important distinction that we need to make and be very, very clear about is that none of this was dealing with genetically modified cannabinoids, because that sentence in and of itself doesn't make any sense. You cannot genetically modify a chemical compound that doesn't have a genetic code. So I think that's one of the biggest things that confused people, is we're not talking about GMO cannabis plants. They're talking about cannabinoid chemical compounds that are being excreted from, yes, indeed, genetically modified yeasts and algae and these sorts of things. So they are getting in there. They are editing some genomes, but they are definitely not editing cannabis plant genomes.
So sure. I think what I should have done is probably made the distinction between cannabis and a cannabinoid.
I think that's very important.
Right?
Yeah, I think
a cannabinoid is THC or CBD or one of the other ones that are being discovered. THCV, for example.
Yes.
Cannabis is a plant. And that is the difference here. And the promise of what Ben is doing is the ability to produce at scale cannabinoids that can be measured and can be dosed and can be produced extremely cheaply, so we actually all have access to these products. That's one of the big problems right now, is that, your bottle of CBD that costs you maybe $60 for an ounce or two is not affordable. It is not sustainable. No one is going to be able to use these things. Well, the ideal, for me anyway, is to make them the price of aspirin. And that's what excited me about the interview with Ben. But Matthew, what else did people write in about?
Sure. So
monitoring
there were a lot of responses that came in. A lot of people brought a lot of different arguments to the table. Some of them we're just not going to talk about because they wanted to take Ben to task about his opinion about opioids, which I think is not a discussion that we need to get into. That's his personal opinions and doesn't really deal with cannabis. So we might as well just, if you don't agree with what he thinks about in those regards, or the whole glyphosate argument that took place, I don't think we need to get into that. But some of the things that did come up that are cannabis and cannabinoid specific are the first one I think we should definitely talk about is what I'm going to call the K2 effect, which was we had a lot of people that were confusing these synthesized cannabinoids with synthetic cannabis. And we all know that K2 and spice has a tendency to overbind. I believe it has a higher receptor affinity is the proper way to say it, which was a term that was thrown around in the episode. But this is not synthetic cannabis. These are, they're making literally delta-9 THC or, C21H30O2 is the chemical molecular formula of delta-9 THC. And if they are actually scientifically recreating that molecular structure and that molecular chemical, this fear that they would affect the body in a different way or bind to receptor cells in a different way, it kind of falls apart because they're not making
K2. They're not making spice. That's not the point. Exactly.
Yeah, and
so
if
you clarify that.
If you get in to look at the molecular formulas for K2, it's close, but there's extra hydrogen in there. There's extra carbon in there. There's another oxygen molecule that gets thrown in. And those things obviously have a very different effect. And that's something that they are not doing. And that's something that is chemically and scientifically provable and measurable because, C21H30O2 is the same no matter how it's made. If that chemical exists, it's going to react the same way.
Another comment came about criticizing Ben on his comments about the entourage effect. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I think that this is really important too because Ben definitely recognizes, just like we all recognize, that the entourage effect is something that is relevant to people who are medicating with cannabis. The cannabis plant as a whole definitely carries with it this entourage effect, but from a medicinal and scientific standpoint, this could even get to the place where you're building your own entourage effects. And I think when you and I were discussing this, we brought up table salt, right? Sodium chloride, NaCl. Sodium chloride is table salt, is table salt, is table salt. Now, if you're like me, you're living in Germany, I like some North Sea, salt for finishing off my steak. That's not necessarily NaCl. There's all sorts of other minerals and compounds that are mixed in with there that give it this sort of well-rounded, beautiful flavor profile and things like that. And I think that that's what we get from our strains of cannabis when we're talking about whole flower. Now, the reason why this argument doesn't really work with what Ben and them are doing is because they are making medicines, targeted treatments for specific problems like inflammation. They want pure CBD in high concentrated amounts. They're not really worried about creating an entourage effect, and they're not really worried about going into competition with people who are growing great cannabis flower either. I do think it's just two completely different markets.
Yeah, that's definitely the point. Exactly. A third argument that another complaint came in about that somehow the mass production of cannabinoids, as Ben and other companies are doing, is going to somehow hurt disadvantaged communities.
Right. And, there is potential threat here. It's very true. Like if they can synthetically produce in bulk pure delta-9 THC that just functions in that regard, and everybody out there who's a consumer just starts consuming that product instead of their whole flower, then yeah, you could see mom and pop shops, dispensaries, inner city people who were disenfranchised before. You could see people getting disenfranchised the second time. But again, I would caution that they're not trying to replace your flower at all. And I think that, cannabis aficionados...
I have to say, I don't see how anybody's going to be disadvantaged by this. We're talking about creating cannabinoids that cost the price of aspirin.
Yeah, you're going
aspirin is not displacing any community. I'm not quite seeing that argument. I have to say, it doesn't really make any sense to me.
Yeah, you're not going into a Rite Aid to buy CBD capsule that is pure and not going to harm you and measured and consistent. It's going to be a completely different experience than I really feel like Blue Dream today because I want to have a nice walk around. And then later tonight, I want something that's going to cause me to go to sleep and that kind of stuff. Like people who are using it's not even a competitive product, I don't think.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think we're talking two completely different products. But listen, this conversation, I hope this conversation continues more and more and more. This is the future. There's no denying this is going to happen. We have the science. We have the technology. This is going to happen. So we should discuss it, and we should look at all the pros and cons, and we should listen to all opinions. And we're going to have Ben back on the show. We're going to have other colleagues of his to talk about what they're doing. We could talk about this forever, but I do want to move into the episode. So let's table it. If you haven't listened to episode 73, folks, go back and listen to it. It's really compelling. It's one of the ones I'm most proud of. I'm really glad we've done it. And please feel free to continue to share your opinions.
Joe and I will continue to publish every episode of the Brave New Weed podcast for free for you, our listeners. But we could always use your support. If you've got a little extra change rattling around in your pocket, you can cruise over to patreon.com/bravenewweed and become a supporter of the show. Everything that you'd pledge to support helps us to increase the guests that we can have on the show, even eventually the frequency of the show. And we have a great set of rewards out there, including copies of Joe's book, invites to special events that we will do in New York City, all sorts of fun things. So if you're enjoying the podcast and you would like to support us, visit patreon.com/bravenewweed today.
Now, for this episode, we're going to talk about the supposed dangers, I put that in quotes, of CBD. And let's face it, CBD sort of magically appeared on Earth about a half a dozen years ago, right? And once it did, the claims manufacturers began making for it sort of sounded equally magical. It helped you sleep, it stopped your epileptic seizures, it stopped your dog's arthritis, it even took away the frown lines around your eyes. And all of this magic happens with no risks or side effects. So, a product that treats the symptoms of everything with no side effects, that sounds a little too good to be true to me. And in fact, some of it isn't true, especially the parts about it having absolutely no side effects or risks. But lately, a lot of reports have been coming around about the toxicity of CBD, that it can damage your liver in the same way as alcohol. And these are equally false. So we got a great doctor, Dr. Michelle Shuffett, the VP of Scientific Research and Communications for Columbia Care, and she's going to talk us through understanding if CBD can in fact hurt you or hurt your liver or interfere with other drugs, even why some CBD gets you high. Dr. Michelle Shuffett. We're going to talk about the dangers of CBD. or the mythological dangers of CBD. I'm here with Michelle Shuffett, and she's the Vice President of Scientific Research and Communications for Columbia Care, one of the country's largest multi-state operating dispensaries. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
I'm so happy that you're joining me today and to talk about this because we are getting a tremendously surprising number of emails and questions about the supposed dangers of CBD, which I don't believe existed. I'm sort of wondering where all these questions are coming from. Are you seeing a lot of questions on this topic?
I have seen a lot of hits from a Google search perspective related to this for sure. I think it's coming from a study that came out last year that got popularized by a few different media outlets, and I think it's kind of propagated from there.
It's a virus. It's a meme. It's a meme virus.
There you go.
All right, so let's dig into some of them. I mean, the one I hear the most is that CBD has a deleterious, a bad effect on the liver. And I think I know the reason why they think this, but can you tell me from your perspective why this would be the case?
There's a couple of reasons why I think that is being propagated and why people are concerned about potential liver damage. One reason is simply the data from Epidiolex, which I'm sure many of our listeners know that Epidiolex is one of the FDA-approved CBD medications, the only one that's out there. And in the Epidiolex studies, they did find an increased incidence of elevation of liver enzymes. They found that primarily in patients who were taking other drugs that impact your liver. They found that it occurred in a dose-related fashion, meaning the more of the drug you take, the more likely you were to see these elevated liver enzymes. And they also saw it primarily in the patients in the trials who had elevated liver enzymes at baseline. So essentially, they were at a disadvantage, if you will, when they started.
And when you say it's dose related, what doses are we talking about? Are we talking about people who take 20 milligrams in the morning, 20 in the afternoon, 20 at night, or are we talking many, manifold times that amount?
Well, in the Epidiolex studies, and what they recommend for Epidiolex is a maximum dose of 20 milligrams per kilogram per day. And if you're like most people, you need to break that down and really try to understand, okay, what does that actually mean? In their studies,
what does that mean? What does that actually mean, Michelle? Tell me.
Well, in their studies, they started patients at a lower dose, and then they titrated up. So that 20 milligrams per kilogram per day is actually the maximum dose that they used in their studies. And if we think about that in a day-to-day perspective, when we're thinking about what people are using, the average person, let's say they weigh 150 pounds.
Okay.
What that would translate to, if you start at the lower end of the range, which is about a half milligram per kilogram, that's about 30 milligrams of CBD a day. If you go to the high end of that 20 milligrams per kilogram per day, that's around 1,300 milligrams of CBD per day. And we know that the average user is pretty much using that 30 milligrams a day. That's typically the amount that's in, I'm going to say a dropper full, which is what a lot of people use to deliver their CBD dose.
And it was Epidiolex delivered by dropper, by liquid form?
It is a liquid form, yes.
Okay. So 1,300 milligrams a day is a lot. It's also very expensive. I don't think people are spending that kind of money on CBD, do you?
I don't think so either. I think the average person is using that lower dose.
Yeah. So your estimation, Dr. Shuffett, because you are an MD, is that true or false? CBD will not impact the liver negatively.
I think we have to have a caveat around that. That's such a definitive statement, Joe.
That would be me. Go on, give me your caveat. It's good to know. Good to know.
So, CBD is everywhere. It's ubiquitous, but that doesn't mean that it's safe to take it in super high amounts. And that also doesn't mean that it's more effective when you take it at super high doses. So what I would say is that the therapeutic range dose of CBD, the average dose that people are taking is something that's generally safe. With any drug, if you take it at a really high dose, you have to worry about toxicity. So
Yeah.
I don't think you can make a definitive statement like that.
So I think you're right. And I think what we usually say is find the therapeutic window. Start low and escalate gradually until you find the relief you're looking for. Would you agree with that as
That is
protocol?
correct.
Start low, stay low, and go slow, right? That's the general rule. Well, let's move to question number 2, which is, can CBD impact the digestive tract? My neurologist said it can. Sometimes I notice it's hard to swallow.
Well,
I don't understand that, but go on. Tell me, what do you think about that one?
Well, when you use the word neurologist in the same sentence with sometimes I notice it's hard to swallow, that makes me think you should actually talk to your neurologist about muscle weakness you're experiencing. I don't think the concern there is necessarily CBD. I think maybe there could be something else going on that you should have a conversation with your neurologist about before you worry about what CBD might do to your digestive tract.
Well, what about impact on digestion, though? Can it make you feel nauseated? Can it make you? I mean, I don't know the specifics of what would be bothering this person.
Well, the common side effects of CBD are typically dose dependent. So the more you take of it, the more likely you are to have a side effect, or the worse it might be. And some of the common side effects are sleepiness or drowsiness. Some people actually get an increased boost of energy. So it's really interesting. It's called biphasic. So at a lower dose, you might get a boost of energy, and a higher dose, you might actually start to feel more of a relaxing effect or a drowsiness. Some people have decreased appetite. Some people have trouble sleeping or trouble concentrating. There are some side effects related to the digestive system. Some people have stomach pain. Some people have diarrhea. And all of those things are seen in that Epidiolex trial, which is honestly our most solid source of evidence when it comes to what CBD can actually do to the body.
Thank you. Now, I think you just answered this question, but it seems to me to still be confusing. What's the impact on the system when one takes a higher dose? I definitely feel odd or something in my body when I take 100 milligrams, maybe even a touch lightheaded. I have a few other questions to ask about this. I know you just explained the biphasic effect, but what's the general rule of thumb with CBD in that?
Well, this question, I think, really makes me wonder, what are you actually taking? So if you take CBD and you feel lightheaded, or you feel a sensation perhaps of almost like feeling high, then that product might actually contain some THC, because CBD formulations are not regulated. And we know that there's so much product out there that's mislabeled. So I would first ask, do you actually know what you're taking and what's in it?
How would you go to find out if the answer to that question, by the way? I mean, some companies post their results, their lab results online, but many do not. What would you suggest?
I would never buy anything if the lab results are not available and the ingredients are not listed clearly. There's multiple studies that have looked at labels, and one in particular was done a couple of years ago. And out of 80 plus samples that they looked at, only 1/3 of those samples were actually labeled correctly. So that means 2/3 of them didn't contain what the label actually said. So you always want to make sure you're buying a CBD product from a licensed, reputable source, and that the certificate of analysis, the COA that you mentioned, is available. So you can be sure that you're getting what you think you're getting.
I've seen some companies put a QR code on their label that you can scan, and it'll bring you directly to the lab results. Is this common?
That seems to be the new trend, putting these codes on CBD packaging. I've started to see that a lot.
And do you think, as this questioner is asking, 100 milligrams a shot would create a feeling of lightheadedness, or is that because you're suspecting it has some THC in it?
I mean, the beautiful thing about CBD and cannabis, and also the probably most frustrating thing about CBD and cannabis, is that it's such a personal experience. Everyone metabolizes it differently. Everyone responds to it differently. So, a dose that works for you may not be a dose that works for someone else, and vice versa. So it's very subjective and very personal in that sense.
So earlier you said that lower doses can cause a state of wakefulness and higher doses can cause sleepiness. But I've read exactly the opposite. And for me, it has no effect. So I'm not a personal judge of anything here. What's the truth? What do we think is the truth? Have you had any experience of either of these high or low doses?
Well, what I've read is that doses around 15 milligrams of CBD are the ones that tend to give you that boost of energy, and that doses 30 to 50 milligrams or more is sort of that range that might cause some drowsiness. Again, it's very personal. So to your point earlier, if someone's trying CBD for the first time, they should always start with a really low dose and see how they respond, and then increase to that desired point of, I'm going to use the word symptom relief, but it may not be a symptom you're trying to relieve, but desired point of effect.
Effect.
I think effective. Way to phrase that.
That's a gentle and non-political way of saying it. So here's another question. Does it have any adverse effects with other medicines like sleep aids or muscle relaxers or even herbs?
It does. So the best way to think about it is CBD can affect the way other medicines work, and other medicines can affect how CBD works. And that's why it's so important before you start taking CBD or any cannabis cannabinoid containing product to talk to your provider or talk to a pharmacist about any other medications you're taking. And when I use the word medication, I mean prescription, over-the-counter, herbal supplements, vitamins, anything you're putting into your body. You should really let your provider or pharmacist know so they can help you understand if there might be a potential interaction. And the reasons that's important is because we do know that THC and CBD are metabolized by a family of enzymes called the cytochrome P450 system, which is just a rather fancy term for a system in your liver that helps break drugs down. And sometimes that system gets turned on, revved up, and other times it gets turned off. And if it's turned on, that means other drugs are going to get metabolized faster, which means you're going to have less of that drug in your body, which means it might not be doing its job. So to use a really simple example, if you're taking an antibiotic and that system gets turned on or revved up and it chews through that antibiotic more quickly, there might not be enough of that antibiotic in your body to fight the infection.
That's a great explanation. Thank you. So clear. So clear. I really appreciate that. I can't tell you. But so are there any natural supplements or herbs that you know of or have heard about that might be interacting with CBD?
Natural supplements and herbs.
Think of things bought in health foods, like in health food stores, that we all have access to, that we all think are rather benign, but that might have, some strong effect with this stuff. Have you heard of anything? Any whispers?
I mean, it boils down to anything that's metabolized by the liver. So I would have to do a little digging for you to come up with a list of vitamins or herbs that are specifically metabolized by the liver.
And are sleep aids or muscle relaxers metabolized by the liver?
Some of them are, yes. The biggest thing when you think about sleep aids or muscle relaxers is those things make you drowsy. So if you are using a cannabis-containing product, THC, CBD, that causes you to feel drowsy, if you put those two things together, you have an increased effect. So you might be more drowsy than you might expect. And that could be a problem when you think about things like doing things around the house or driving a car or operating some sort of machinery. You don't expect to be that drowsy, but when you combine them, you get that increased effect.
Thank you. Some people are suggesting that when you take CBD regularly, it stores in the body. So over a period of time, like 2 or 3 months, you actually need less to get the same therapeutic effect. Any evidence to this?
That's really interesting. I've read a little bit about the fact that oftentimes you need to use CBD daily for 2 to 4 weeks before you're going to feel any effect.
Yes.
And, some people feel it immediately. Other people don't notice anything for after that 2 to 4 weeks. So if you think about how it works in theory, this idea that the endocannabinoid system, which is the system that CBD is impacting, is all about homeostasis. It's about bringing your body back into balance. If you think about it that way, it kind of makes sense, but I don't think we have any substantial evidence that would help us understand this. It's just anecdotal. When you talk to the pharmacists that are working in this industry who are seeing patients every single day, it's very much an anecdotal finding that I think is pretty consistent. Some people it works right away, other people that 2 to 4 week time period.
But no evidence of it somehow storing in the body or changing some signaling so that less is required over time.
I have not read anything about that personally. I would have to do a little digging again for you there.
Yeah, if you figure anything out, you call me back and we'll add it into this. Okay, the FDA wrote this in a news release. The more serious side effects include thoughts about suicide, attempts to commit suicide, feelings of agitation, new or worsening depression, aggression, and panic attacks. Now, to me, that does not sound like CBD, the CBD that I know. How do you think about that?
Are you reading from the package insert of Epidiolex? Is that where that's coming from?
No, the FDA put out a news release about this. I'm going to give you the exact quote. Yeah, it came from the FDA news release dated June 25, 2018. How about that?
How about that? I have to imagine that that's coming from the labeling that was required for Epidiolex. So all certain classes of medications are required to have what's called class labeling, and Epidiolex is one of those. So in their package insert, you'll see things about suicidal thoughts and things of that nature. And that wasn't something that they saw within the study, but if I understand correctly, that's just something that you're required to put in that label because the class of medication.
Let me read that. You may be well right. It says Epidiolex must be dispensed with a patient medication guide that describes important information about the drug's use and risks. As is true for all drugs that treat epilepsy, the most serious risks include these, just as I read, thoughts about suicide, panic attacks, aggression, depression, blah, 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 blah. So are you saying that that's sort of a generic warning that the FDA requires companies to put on the product?
I think it's related to labeling rules and requirements. Mm-hmm. I'm not familiar with the specific labeling rules and requirements for anti-seizure medications. Mm-hmm. But my immediate reaction is that that's something related to that, because the most common things they saw in the trials were the elevated liver enzymes, decreased appetite and diarrhea, and then some sort of nervous system related findings. There was some fatigue, insomnia, somnolence, poor quality sleep, things of that nature. But they also had things from an adverse effect profile that you wouldn't expect, like rash or infection. You're not going to immediately be able to tie those things to the product, but they were observed during the clinical trial.
Another doctor suggested that even these elevated liver enzymes might be the effect that when somebody with epilepsy or one of these really serious conditions like Dravet syndrome is taking a lot of Epidiolex, they're taking a lot of oil in. It's actually it's in a carrier of oil, and that itself may affect the liver. Any thoughts?
Yes. Mm-hmm. It is in a carrier of oil, and there's also alcohol in the formulation. So the patients taking Epidiolex are exposed to all of those things. And as I said earlier, they're also on numerous other anti-seizure medications that impact the liver. So it's a cumulative effect of all those things that can potentially be causing these liver-related problems. I think one of the more interesting studies that popped up around the same time frame was an animal study out of Arkansas that was looking at CBD and liver damage. And that's the one that I hinted at earlier today that was sort of publicized by a couple of different media outlets. And, there were a lot of headlines saying that CBD causes liver damage. And, first and foremost, it's hard to translate the results of an animal study to humans. And secondly, this animal study involved massive doses of CBD, massive doses. And they're 10 times the dose that you're taking from an Epidiolex perspective. And I think the exact number was 2.5 grams of CBD per kilogram.
That's
not milligrams.
2,500 milligrams, right? Do I have that right?
Yes, it is.
That's a lot.
You do.
That's a lot of
you
something.
You do. It's a lot. It's a lot. And the authors, explain that they chose their doses based on this very complex in my mind anyway, concept called allometric scaling, which is a way that you scale drug doses from animals to humans. And that's something that's typically done when you don't know the right dose in humans. And in the case of CBD, we know that dose. We have a tremendous body of evidence from the Epidiolex studies that helps us understand what the right dose is. So we didn't necessarily need them to do this type of scaling to set up this study. And I don't think it can be translated to humans.
I can't imagine a mouse liver is anywhere translatable to a human liver, frankly.
No.
I don't think so. So are there any other negative symptoms that you or people in the clinic have come across with CBD that we haven't discussed?
Other negative symptoms.
Adverse effects.
I haven't heard of any. From a being cautious, being a very conservative person, I think you always want to talk about some of the things that could happen, just so people are aware. But they aren't things, and we went through those side effects earlier, so we don't have to rattle through all of them again. But I think that most of the pharmacists in this space are definitely leaning towards talking to folks about some of the things you might experience to help manage expectations.
One more time, the average dose of CBD is 15 to 30 milligrams per time of use, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Good. Anything else you want to talk about while I have you here on the topic of CBD these days? I mean, the biggest problem to me is it does seem that it's really hard to know what's in the bottle. That seems to be the biggest issue now, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow.
I agree with you 100%. In order for people to be comfortable with what they're taking, there has to be transparency, and people have to feel confident that if the bottle says it contains 30 milligrams in a single dose, that's what they're actually getting. And once we have a little bit more of a regulatory framework around that, I think we'll start to see fewer bad experiences, and we'll start to feel more confident in our abilities to use it to find relief for whatever you're trying to find relief from.
Thank you, Michelle Shuffett, VP Scientific Research and Communications at Columbia Care. You did a great job of communicating, Michelle. I really appreciate your time and your articulate responses to these questions. And I know our listeners do as well.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's a pleasure to chat with you today.
Joe, I know I personally would like to thank you, and I really hope that our listeners got some important information out of that conversation. It seems like today, like I've referred to CBD as being like the new Avon, right? Because everybody can sell it. You can franchise this stuff. It's available on a million websites online. People are like multi-level marketing it, and you find it in gas stations and truck stops. But there's again, like what we were talking about at the beginning of the show, there's a difference between CBD and CBD products. And if some guy is mixing chemicals in his garage and you don't know what's in there and there's no regulation on the labeling, and like you can really cause harm. And if you're just lying to people and saying like, oh yeah, this CBD product is great, you're giving the chemical a bad name. And I really hope that we can start to shift our groupthink on these products and really focus on, let's get some good CBD out there in the world.
Second part of this episode is a new format we're trying. It's called Ask the Doctor. And in this episode, a patient whose name is Jules, who has suffered from insomnia for over 30 years, is bringing her issue to Dr. Mary Clifton. Dr. Mary is a cannabis prescribing physician. She's based in New York, and she's also the best-selling author of The Grass is Greener, Medical Marijuana, THC, and CBD Oil. She's a great doctor. She's an integrative physician, and she's going to spend some time really talking through Jules. And let's see what you guys think about this format, if it's interesting, if it's enlightening, and if we should continue doing it. Dr. Mary Clifton. So I'm here with Dr. Mary Clifton. We're going to do our very first Ask the Doctor episode on the Brave New Weed podcast. FYI, Mary's an MD. She's board certified, licensed. She's an internal medicine doctor. She practices in Manhattan. And she's also a recognized expert in CBD and cannabis. She's the founder of CBDandCannabisInfo.com and the creator of the Cannabinoid Protocol, which is a professional certification course. She also does consultants to patients, and she creates provider education. And she has worked with lots of pharmaceutical, CBD, and cannabis corporations on product development, speaking, telemedicine, and scientific directorship in both the U.S. and Europe. Mary, nice to have you with me this morning. It's a pleasure.
I'm excited that everything is moving forward with this. We've been talking about doing this for a while.
Well, let's see how we go. Now, so what we've got is one of our listeners, Jules, has agreed to come on and talk about her particular concerns and her issues. Jules, good morning.
Good morning, Joe.
And I want to first just ask you to just describe yourself, Jules, and tell the listeners a little bit about you and your condition quickly, please.
Okay. So I was a practicing psychotherapist with a full practice, and I have been struggling for now going on 37 years of absolutely crippling and decimating insomnia. And it's just eroded my energy. And I've had to give up my practice about, maybe even 10 years ago now.
Oh, that's terrible. That sounds really devastating. So let's talk. Mary, I'm going to leave this to you, okay? I'd like you to sort of listen to Jules, walk us through, and then let's give the listeners, like, this is basically a doctor's appointment for our listeners. I do have to say before we begin, we are not dispensing medical advice. This is all in the service of education. If you have concerns, you should talk to your own healthcare providers. The law wants me to say that, and I'm being a diligent, good boy, right?
I think that's important.
Okay, over to you, doctor. Sure. Over to you.
Great to meet you, Jules. I'm excited to talk to you about this whole process you've been through. Can you just confirm for me, do you have any other chronic medical conditions that the doctors take care of you for, like high blood pressure or diabetes? Have you ever had a stroke or heart attack?
No. The only, at one point, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease, and I did see some of the top West Coast neurotoxin doctors. And I did Lyme treatment for about 10 years, and I threw the entire thing out after that. because it didn't help me.
So you mean you were treated for Lyme, but it didn't really take away the symptoms or help to control the symptoms for you?
Not at all.
Okay. All right. All right. And anything else besides the Lyme's disease?
No.
All right. And the insomnia preceded the Lyme's disease?
Yes. Started when I was 23.
Started when you were?
23 years old.
Oh, really? Are you aware of an inciting event or something that brought the insomnia on for you?
Not really, no. I mean, again, to be concise, I've studied this insomnia for years now as someone who's interested in self-development, and no, there's not severe trauma in my background. There wasn't a physical event that occurred, so no.
Nothing that brought it on.
No.
And it's a lot to unpack, 37 years of difficulty sleeping. I mean, a lot of times, when I'm working with patients and talking to them about it, we talk about how, like having an inciting event like a divorce or a death of someone important to you that leads to difficulty sleeping is oftentimes pretty easy for us to manage because because there's sort of a beginning and an end, as opposed to, a situation where the symptoms have been going on for a really long time and there doesn't seem to be anything clear to manage to make them go away. It must be really frustrating for you.
It's led me to a place of deep despair, quite honestly. And I'm talking about severe insomnia. Last night I took a pharmaceutical, but I've been up since 3 a.m. and slept maybe 3.5 hours. But many nights of very little sleep.
Okay. And so you're just mostly catching it when you can for short periods of time.
Yes. And I meditate and do other things to help, try to feed my system.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've tried everything so far, but what can you give me a short list of what you've tried so far?
Short list. Well, I've tried to stay away from pharmaceuticals. I'm very holistically oriented, but I've tried every herbal supplement and other supplements, and the pharmaceuticals, as of recent, have been on occasion Xanax, but I don't like the benzodiazepine family.
Mm-hmm.
I was on, for a little bit, baclofen, which is a muscle relaxer,
mm-hmm.
and also propranolol. And the truth is that anything that works, even CBD, will work for a short time. Maybe I'll get 2 nights or 3 nights. And then whatever goes on in my body pushes back and it stops working.
Mm. And you've tried CBD. Can you tell me what that experience was like?
Yeah, I've taken a lot of CBD and THC, and I got up to 100 milligrams of CBD, and for a period of time, as in recent, it would give me maybe 3 to 4 hours of sleep, which was a godsend. But as I mentioned earlier, then it stopped working and I've had to pull back. On CBD, I do feel sometimes, for me, 100 milligrams is a little higher dose. And I feel a little odd on CBD, I have to say. I don't know if it lowers blood pressure, but sometimes it, when I get up to go to the bathroom, I feel a little
wobbly.
It's odd. It's hard to describe. It's very physical. It's not per se mental, but yeah.
Yeah, the higher levels of, I think that we say that CBD is not psychoactive and that it doesn't get you high, but clearly it's psychoactive. It doesn't get you high, but it can work with anxiety and all kinds of other conditions. And so it makes sense that there's a psychoactive component here that is, but just not one that necessarily gets you high. But I have seen, older clients of mine start to take, CBD for conditions and then find that they get a lot of muscle relaxation and sedation on the products, So certainly in your case, that might be what you're experiencing. 100 milligrams seems like a high dose for a lot of my patients. How has your experience been with using THC?
Mixed. And honestly, I can't remember. That's one of the things, is that my brain does not work as well as it used to. And my
Without
memory.
sleep. Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
Either THC or CBD seemed to lower my blood pressure, because a few times when I got up on the combination or on just CBD at a higher dose, I felt like I was going to faint, which was one of the questions that I had for you. But that happened about 3 times. And it was kind of scary when it happened.
We don't usually see a lower blood pressure with CBD. There is some suggestion that taking CBD can, lower blood pressure, decrease insulin resistance, improve waist to hip ratios. Over time, people who use cannabinoid formulations have healthier metabolisms than people that don't. And they think that's really almost completely because they keep their weight lower. People who use cannabinoids over their lifetime keep smaller body weights, and that leads to all of the benefits of a smaller body weight in terms of decreased risk for metabolic disorders. So that, but a transient decrease in blood pressure we really don't see. Sometimes when you're using THC-containing products, you'll see a transient elevation in blood pressure and in heart rate, which some people have suggested might be the reason why there's case reports of people having heart attacks or strokes after they take, after they use cannabis. That if you're predisposed to that already, then that might, create enough instability that it starts to, take a predisposition and actually move it to a process. But I'm not aware of the of decreased blood pressure or a lot of vasomotor instability around around just taking CBD. Yeah, 100 milligrams is a lot, but in some cases, I think it may not be enough. I was just at a investor meeting in New York City where they brought some Canadian researchers to come and talk about their CBD product. And the Canadian researchers were saying that just for generalized anxiety disorder, just a standard anxiety, not like even a really significant syndrome, like a PTSD or a more significant anxiety phenomenon, that the sweet spot for CBD is settling out somewhere around 300 milligrams a day, which seems extremely high for me because, many of my patients are perfectly comfortable at 100. 300 is a lot.
What about mixing with THC, though? Jules happens to live in the West Coast, so she's in a legal state. Wouldn't it make sense to try a ratio so you get a little more activation with the THC, Mary?
Well, that's what I was going to ask, exactly how THC has been tried to be implemented and maybe think about specific flowers,
I did take a combination of THC and CBD for a while, but I think I have low blood pressure. That's when I started to have those experiences that felt a little daunting to me, and so I pulled back on the THC.
What do you mean by a daunting experience?
Well, when I got up to go to the bathroom, I thought it was like a low blood pressure thing that was happening. I felt like I was going to faint, and that happened about 3 times. So that's when I stopped the THC for a while.
Okay. That's interesting. How many doses of THC did you try? Was it like a half a dozen attempts or 2 or 3 attempts or?
No, I took bottles of it.
So you were on it for like months.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know what strain you were using, Jules, or what what particular flower you were using, or were you, or was it just like a milligram dose that you were administering?
Yes. I remember the company. I don't know if I can say that, but I don't remember the flower.
Oh, okay. And were they like 10 milligram doses?
Yes, I think I was taking about 10 milligrams.
Okay. And ma'am, did you, that's a very good start. That's a very good start. I mean, if you were taking it for a long time and you had a few episodes of having the dizzies in the middle of the night, there's so many reasons to get dizzy in the middle of the night. If you were starting to get sick, or if, if you were dehydrated, or any number of things. So I hate to immediately, reach back to the THC to blame it for the dizziness episodes. So I'm not sure exactly what caused that. But that might be worth going back. I think, Jules, in this setting, of course, you've done everything to keep your room, to get your room comfortable for sleep. You don't have a TV in your room. Your room is dark and quiet. There's a couple of things I want to suggest here. You might want to think about temperature. There's some really interesting data that people are really not responding so much to light with circadian rhythms, but to temperature. And if we were in these paleo times that are so popular to think about right now, you would be sleeping on the ground, and the ground would be cool and would keep your body cool while you slept at night. A lot of us get snuggled up under these covers, and then we get way too warm, and the warmth is a problem. There's some new products from the people who used to make water beds, these chili pads that maintain.
I tried one. Sorry to interrupt, but I
one. Okay.
Returned it.
And you returned it. It didn't work.
It didn't work for me. And I keep
I have mixed reviews on those with sleepers. I've had mixed reviews.
And we keep our room really cold. And I know I'm kind of, mixing topics here, but I wanted to say, I totally forgot, this is my brain. It's as if my nervous system is acting like it is in severe fight flight, and it can't turn off. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's a switch. It's not like I'm anxious every night that I go to bed, though I do have a kind of post-traumatic stress around going to bed.
Oh, for sure.
But it's not as if every night I go to bed anxious. It's that it's like stuck in a fight flight on position, and my brain will not turn off.
I would think approaching this when, because what you really need to do is dissociate. You're going to need more of like a knockout level of THC, or using a strain that's consistent with more of a knockout, where you have a very big, where it has a very big reaction in your body and works to break that phenomenon. Sort of like people with chronic pain, we really don't have, we really don't get a lot of benefit in a lot of cases with just a small dose of CBD with chronic pain, because their pathways have been so skewed for so long that we can't get the brain to respond a little bit differently without giving a pretty significant dose of THC. A lot of my patients who are dealing with chronic pain, like for a small amount of pain with mild fibromyalgia, or with some, mild muscle or body aches, CBD does well. And then as pain increases, my patients are using like high THC strains, like AK-47 is one that comes up a lot in people who have chronic pain and are getting it under control with the right flower. Like as they go through all these flowers, what's the flower they end up settling in on? And I think in your case, you may be thinking about the same thing, where you might be looking at a strain that is really quite a bit higher in THC and is really going to help to knock things out. I would think about, in your case, ma'am, handling this with, I would think about trying Medicine Man or Kosher Kush first. Those are great medicinal strains. They're And they're very, very nice for managing pain, but they're also very good on anxiety and insomnia. It's a product that I would take an hour or two before bed and enjoy the relaxation that it gives you, and then it moves you into a nice deep sleep without without a lot of other side effects. Sometimes in we might use canatonic, or you might think about using canatonic or cataract, but I think those are a little bit too high in CBD for you and are not going to give you what you're trying to do. I'd like to just look up one more product. I have some notes in the other room, and I may just have to disassemble myself from all this wiring and go get those notes, because I was just doing video on my favorite 40 medicinal strains. But there are some strains that are known as knockout strains, that with one or two inhalations, you're going to get that they're like the heavyweights of the community, and they'll do a really good job of putting you down. Like Trainwreck may also be a really good one too. For that, I mean, obviously, aptly named for something that is going to give you quite a bit of control without. Sorry. Just one moment, please. That's a potent product, but more of a sativa strain that's going to allow you to relax for a few hours before bed and then slip into bed.
One of my questions for you, Mary, is what pharmaceuticals could I blend with CBD that you might think that could help with sleep?
There's a lot of pharmaceuticals that are going to be valuable here. I think I'm going to let Joe take over for a few minutes, and then I'll return in just a few minutes.
Okay, no problem. So, Jules, one thing I want to be clear about is the strains Mary was recommending are THC strains. They're not CBD strains. You're clear about that, right?
Yes.
And are you willing to use THC in this way?
In this way, meaning
an hour or two before sleep, you take a few inhalations, either through a vaporizer or through smoking, whatever works for you. And just be able to relax with it. And, if you get psychoactivity, AKA high, are you happy to be high? Will you be high for a couple of hours and let that drift into a nice dozy sleep?
Certainly have done it before. I mean, I'm happy to try. I'm happy to try if it
I think
works.
it's one way of approaching it. And, so she's suggesting really start on these high THC products to really change the way the receptors are flowing. I'm not sure what the language is really, but to change those, let's think about it as changing neural pathways, right? Changing the communication signals. And I would assume she would like you to do that for a couple of weeks to see if we can get any change going on. Okay. And I would also assume that she would suggest not doing CBD at the same time, or at least doing it in a ratio of, 2-to-1 or something like that, but really trying to make a change by using the THC, which is an interesting approach, I have to say. It's a very interesting approach.
I'm delighted to try. Can I get those strains here?
Oh yes, you're in
Washington.
You're Washington, right? Oh yeah, you're at the epicenter of those things. Yeah, you'll have no problem. AK-47, Medicine Man, Kosher Kush, Trainwreck are the THC strains, and I think you can find them in a local dispensary. If you go on Weed Maps or any of those sites and type in those strains, they will locate you to a local dispensary nearby you.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
And do you vaporize or do you inhale smoke?
I've done both. Both.
So, your pleasure, but definitely, make the room. This is what we tell people at Medical Cannabis Mentor: make the room dark. Keep it nice music. Just get into that sleep mode. and then inhale, or watch a movie or something. But, keep the stimulation low and just ease into it. Let's see what happens.
Happy to try.
I think it makes sense to sort of start with that THC protocol and then, move to another thing after a couple of weeks. And you can connect with Mary on this after this call, and we'll check in on the podcast also to see, how things are proceeding.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
I think Mary's back. Are you back?
Yeah, thank you for your patience with me. Yeah, Jules, I think a good idea here would be to do a THC titration, just like Joe is talking about, and potentially really increasing the amount that you're using. Maybe even think about having a product available for the middle of the night, so that after 3 hours or 4 hours, you could actually take another administration. Some people with CBD are going to get different, or THC are going to get different responses than others, because the THC, because of fatty acid amine hydrolase, there's differing concentrations of FAAH in different people. And so some people break down products faster than others. So it may be that you're breaking down the product very quickly and not necessarily getting the getting a long-term benefit from the product. So backing up and taking it.
What about starting with at the same time you're inhaling, taking an edible to maybe carry her through the night? So she'll do a couple of inhalations to, calm down, let that wear off after an hour or two, grace into sleep, and then take an edible that should carry her through, another 6 hours or so?
I love the idea of an edible. Jules, when you've been administering before, what have you tried?
I've tried at one point. I've been given some different capsules, and people have said to me at the dispensary, "You won't notice this at all." And I'm completely stoned out of my mind.
Good old dispensaries. Yeah, it's a problem. It's really tough.
They don't really have a lot of, the best way to be successful at adding these new products is always through an inhalation method. I love the PAX product because most of my patients are city dwellers, and you just want to be respectful to your neighbors when you're using these products. And the PAX, is more of a little oven rather than a cigarette. So you don't get as much smoke. And then if you exhale in a personal respirator, you're not, it's like exhaling onto an acre of land. It's filled with activated charcoal, and it absorbs all the odor. So you can use an inhalation tool and get instant, or 8 or 9 minutes, virtually instant results, and see if it's working for you. And then if it doesn't work, you can set an alarm, and 25 or 40 minutes later, you can have another inhalation. So I love that for seeing how different products interact with your body and which ones that you like. And then once you land on a great product, you can switch over. Edibles, I think virtually everybody will say that edibles result in more sedation over a longer period of time. I think Joe's right on there. A lot of my patients with difficulty sleeping are taking an edible frequently at night. But in the range of 20 to 60 milligrams of THC for a chronic insomnia. I'm surprised at how high.
That's a lot, yeah.
It's a lot, yeah. So 10 milligrams is a good start, but for somebody with as resistant and treatment resistant as your condition has been, I would think that one of the main problems here is that you're just not increasing the dose enough. You're not giving yourself a high enough dose of any product. But recognizing that may lead to some sedation during the day, especially as you move initially through adding the products. It's definitely going to lead to some sluggishness during the day until you get used to it. And getting used to it could take 6 weeks. It takes a long time to add a new medicine.
Can we give Jules a 4-week program to try, Mary? What do you think? we're not advising, and she's going to talk to her healthcare practitioner about this. But is there a sort of a protocol that you could give to her that would make sense to follow?
Of course, Jules. I'd love to help you with that. I mean, do you think that, I think in your case, if I was advising what would be my best idea, if you would like to try CBD, we could circle back and use that. However, I think in your case, I think you'd be better advised to use a THC product at night and try to find try to find the Medicine Man or Kosher Kush, because I think taking those a few hours before bedtime would be very relaxing and give you that bit of dissociation, a little high, that's going to allow you to not build a level of anxiety around falling asleep. You've done all of the sleep hygiene things for your room, the darkness and the coolness and everything. And that's wonderful. Then all that's in place. And then you can fall asleep with these products and see if they work. And then I would just settle on what dose works. Maybe it's 1 inhalation. I have a feeling it's going to be more like 3 to 5 inhalations to get, but that depends on how long you're holding your breath and how big of an inhalation you take, all that's very individualized. And then once we get an administration amount figured out, then we could circle back and see how which edible we would use and how we would position that. Because the edibles are going to give us a 60 to 90 minute onset of action. Everybody who's used an edible, right, has a terrible edible story. And so I don't want you to take too many edibles and get yourself into trouble and not have a successful outcome right away.
Thank you so much. Can I ask you another question?
Well, of course.
Circling again back to the CBD for a minute, I know this I might be barking up the wrong tree, but I wanted to try actually microdosing psilocybin in the morning.
Oh, that's so interesting. I was doing a consult with a little old lady yesterday. Not that any of us are getting any younger, but 78 years old. And she asked me if I'd read any of Michael Pollan's work. And I said, I think I've read every word that Michael Pollan has ever written. He's one of my favorites. And she said, well, me and my book club, we read his latest book about psilocybin and we're so interested.
And we really want to go there. That's great.
I can hardly believe I felt really like I was in my crowd. I felt like I'm doing the right thing with my life right now. These are some really innovative people. I think that's brilliant. I love the idea of a psilocybin experience and the microdosing. I'll tell you what I know. There's quite a bit of good research that's been done at Johns Hopkins, and then the research was halted. And the reason for the research being halted abruptly is still pretty unclear, even to the researchers. But Johns Hopkins they found amazing work, amazing value for people who were approaching end of life and needed to come to terms with that, or for people with severe recalcitrant, treatment-resistant depression. Some very exciting advances in things that seemed as though they were permanently stuck for some people. The research was halted, and they brought in a bunch of their undergraduates to create to try to grow the psilocybin on an E. coli medium, because part of the problem is you can't get a standard dose to use this stuff. So they were, when you're grinding up a mushroom, it's hard to get a consistent product. These kids were effective in growing the product on an E. coli medium. And so now they're going to be able to manufacture the psilocybin and give in a very standardized dose. So they've resumed all of the studies, or are in the process of resuming the studies. So I think for very treatment-resistant situations such as yours, this might be a very interesting thing to explore. We are way out of any American Medical Association territory here. This is way out there.
Would you suggest? I'm sorry. Would you suggest doing the THC protocol first, though, for a while, Mary, and then picking up with the psilocybin? I mean, it seems like a lot to confound the two simultaneously, right?
Well, it's always a good idea to do one or another, because you never know what's working when you try to do 6 things at once. Yeah. That's true.
What I was wondering is, the night before I microdose, can I take some sleep products if it's either herbal or CBD or THC or pharmaceutical? Is it safe for my brain to be taking those products, then microdosing, and then the night of microdosing, can I take any kind of supplement?
I mean, these are questions I would just have no answers to. We really don't know anything about microdosing. I would try to have a very clean existence around a microdosing experience so that you don't confuse the situation at all. But with that said, I mean, herbal products, I don't know what harm they could do. The microdosing for a period of time, upwards of 30 days or 2 weeks, is I think where the studies are going. And these are very early protocols. But, there may be some value in these very treatment-resistant situations. I hope we get some data soon for that. Because what we're doing now with treatment-resistant people with, electroconvulsive therapy or with multiple medications is just so shocking and rudimentary, and it's something that we need to correct. For our severe, we still don't take great care of our mentally ill. Around the world, but in this country also. So, getting a product like this together would be great. But in your case, it might be interesting to give it a try. I'm certainly not disinclined to suggest that for you, but I don't think that we have it. I think the data is more leaning toward people with really significant depression or end of life issues is where they're really seeing great initial results. I don't think they're studying it in exactly your condition.
Also for post-traumatic stress, they were studying it as well, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
They were, and they've had some good results from the research I've read. But so do you feel set on a course of action now?
I certainly am happy to try this course. Yes.
I think the idea of one at a time makes sense. So at least you can say, all right, that worked or that didn't work, right? And then eliminate. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Mary, any final words to Madam?
I think starting at a 10 milligram administration of THC, and then, or something that is about that equivalent, or if we're working with, flowers, choosing one of those medicinal flowers and doing 1 inhalation or 3 inhalations maximum to start so that you can see what your response is. And then going up from there. It takes about 2 weeks to get a titration together, no matter if you're handling pain or insomnia or whatever you're handling. So, one of the ways that people, don't do well is to not give themselves enough time to titrate. And then, I had one person that I thought was the funniest titration story ever that said, I gave it to myself. It didn't work. I gave it to my dog. Didn't work. So anyway, CBD doesn't work. And I said, oh, well, how many times? Well, both of us tried it once. So I don't even know where to start with that person. So you really do need to give yourself 2 solid weeks. And we're creating an app so that if you need to, all of us in these titration schedules need to be able to write down what we're doing and see how it works. But until the app is ready, just get a piece of paper and put the product that you use, over on the one side, and then write down, the time that you started it and set a 25-minute timer on your phone. And then your timer will beep at the end, and you can put yourself on a 0 to 10 scale at the beginning and at the end, where you can see if it worked or if it didn't work.
Sounds good. And you don't want me to do CBD with that, correct? You want me just to do the THC?
Well, I'd like you to focus on the flowers, on the whole flowers that you grind up in your grinder and use in your packs or in a marijuana cigarette, and then that way you'll be able to get all the benefits of all the terpenes around it. You're going to get THC and also CBD. But if you start taking a lot of CBD, you're just going to knock the THC off the receptors, and we won't get the benefit from the THC.
Okay.
So there's only so many receptors. So if we want to try to focus on a flower that's going to get you benefit I think that's a wise thing for us to do. Let's try these 2 flowers, and then Joe, if you can put us in contact.
Check in 2 weeks or so. Yeah.
Let's check in 2 weeks, Jules, and then I can give you some other flower recommendations, and we can keep you. We can just keep working on this little puzzle together.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you both for joining in. Let's see how it works. We'll keep tabs on this. We've now got a running drama that we're going to be following. And listen, thanks so much for your participation. Really appreciate it, both of you. Dr. Mary Clifton and Jules. Thank you.
The Brave New Weed podcast is an advocate and supporter of the Medical Cannabis Mentor platform. Medical Cannabis Mentor is an evidence-based educational platform for doctors, dispensaries, and patients that uses state-of-the-art online learning technology to educate you in today's modern cannabis world. You can find out more information by visiting medicalcannabismentor.com.
I just have to add at the end of this that the opinions that were expressed during this interview and during any interaction with Dr. Mary are her own. Any insights offered today are not meant to replace the advice of your healthcare practitioner. Your health journey and your needs are unique to you. Our conversation and information is intended for the Brave New Weed community, and that involves people who are 18 years and older. So please be sure to refer to federal, state, or provincial regulations for all THC products, as legalization varies by location. That, my friends, is our official disclaimer.
We're not doctors. We're not doctors.
But Mary is. Okay.
But Mary is.
Before signing off, I want to thank our sponsor, Summit 420. Summit 420 is a great cannabis conference that's held by the Young Presidents Association organization. This year it's going to be in San Francisco, April 23 and 26. And as mentioned at the top of the show, the keynote this year is with Dr. Raphael Meshulam, who discovered THC and CBD in 1964 and has spent the last 60 years of his life investigating cannabis, cannabinoids, and their effects on the human body and human health. He's going to reveal some interesting science and chemistry about his newest innovation, which is a new family of synthetic and stable cannabinoid acid molecules that have a demonstrated higher potency than any existing cannabinoids. So this could offer some amazing therapeutic possibilities. So please, if you want to come to this conference, and I highly encourage you to, go to www.ypo/summit 420 2020. Space is limited. Don't delay. Book now and come and hear this amazing, amazing conference.
Joe and listeners, I would actually like to take a minute here, if I could, to address some feedback that we have received about the advertisements that are placed now in the Brave New Weed podcast. This is a partnership that we have entered into with a publication platform that is helping us to sell ad space around the show. We want you all to know that these ads are served up in an auction-based platform, and nothing that appears in these ads in the show should be construed as endorsements or recommendations in any way, shape, or form. So please know that we made this choice as a financial decision to help us produce this podcast for you, but those things are a little bit out of our control. We're going to continue to run ads. We need to be able to support the production of the interviews that Joe does, the stories that we can bring you, and everything like that. But please recognize that those are not advertisements or endorsements that are personally backed by us. And we just want full disclosure that those are paid placements on the podcast.
Matthew, good to talk to you. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.